Mine and my father's Skinwalker experience. Hey guys, I recently made this post in Reddit The Truth Is Here, and I thought you might also enjoy it. Now, let me start by saying that, having spent my entire life living in New Mexico, a lot of people I know have claimed to have seen a Skinwalker. They are kind of our regional boogeyman, but ask a Navajo about them, and they'll either absolutely ignore the question, and all following, or they'll kind of laugh it off, saying something to the effect of, well, white people believe they're myths. Well, here's my story regarding them. My father owns a small delivery service that operates out of Farmington, NM. We'd mostly deliver small packages out to the middle of nowhere that are too much of a hassle for the larger delivery companies to bother with. My dad is the only employee, and we have a few pickup trucks and a trailer. One day, we get a delivery out to Window Rock, Arizona, on the Navajo reservation, about 2 hours from Farmington. My dad gets the call for the job while he is chilling with his Navajo friend Travis and his girlfriend. Travis mentions how he got family in Window Rock that he hasn't seen in ages and suggests they go with him. I was about 6 or 7 years old at the time, and it was the summertime, so Dad decides we'll all go down together. He can do his delivery really quick. Then while Travis sees his family, we can go check out the Window Rock, big rock face with a large hole in that goes to the other side, pretty cool. We had to convoy in separate trucks. Since my dad's was located down with fright, we decided to bring along some talkie-walkies so we can communicate with one another. We spent our time in Window Rock. Everything is generally uneventful, and we start heading home along the old highway with my dad and I in front, and Travis and his girlfriend in their truck behind us. I honestly don't remember most of the Window Rock trip, but this next part I can never forget. We're somewhere on the highway between Window Rock and Gallup NM. It had just rained earlier in the day, and the road was kind of slick, so we were taking it pretty slow. On the left of the highway there was nothing but sandstone cliffs, and on the right side there was a huge field separated from the road by a small barbed wire fence. We crest the top of this hill, and down at the bottom of the hill we see what appears to be a very large dog sitting back on its haunches in the middle of the road, facing the cliffs. My dad calls over the radio, "Hey Trav, do you see that big-ass dog?" Travis starts yelling back over the radio, "That is not a dog, speed it right now and hit it." He sounds almost hysterical. He just keeps screaming, "Hit it! Jay, you have to hit it, please, hit that fucking thing right now." So my dad starts to speed up, and we get a bit closer. I can begin to see it a little more clearly. It's covered in this brown, wiry, matted hair that appears to have dried blood all over it. It's still facing the cliffs, but the moment our headlights hit it, it turns and looks at us, and it has a face. I don't know how to describe it, other than a mix between a bear's and a human's face. It looks twisted and distorted and almost in pain. As we get closer to this thing, we start to realize it's actually fucking huge. Though it was still sitting on its haunches, it is about shoulder height with the hood of the truck. We get literally inches from hitting it when it lets out this scream that sounds like someone screaming as their lungs are filling with water, and it leaps backwards towards the field, landing just on our side of the barbed wired fence. Then, with another leap, it was gone from sight. Travis is coming over the radio again. "Holy shit, keep driving! We have to get out of here, we have to go faster!" He kept repeating that last part. "We have to get out of here, and we have to go faster." Pretty soon we are speeding like crazy, and just as we start to come near the outskirts of Gallup, we get pulled over. Travis pulls his truck over with us. Naturally, this makes the cop, a Navajo man himself, very on edge, and he immediately asks why Travis felt the need to pull over as well. Travis says, "We just saw a Skinwalker a few miles back, and it's been following us." The officer immediately turns white, stammers something about a verbal warning, gets in his car and takes off. We do the same. We didn't see anything else that night, but when we got home, Travis refused to let us leave without taking some kind of Navajo totem thing that was supposed to keep it away. So yeah, I guess that's my Skinwalker story. Sorry for the length, but thank you for reading. If any of you guys have had any experiences with Skinwalkers, I would love to hear them. My Skinwalker experience. I've seen a lot of posts about Skinwalkers lately, so I thought I'd share my own story. Back about 10 or so years ago, My good friend and I would occasionally take trips to our family's property, out in the middle of nowhere. It was fairly remote. You had to drive up a dirt road a few miles and couldn't access it unless you had a key to the chain on the gate. There wasn't anyone around for miles. All that there was a trailer they had towed up and left to sleep in. The feel out there was always a little off. One day, we were wandering around the property, not really thinking much of it, until about 20 minutes later when we realized we had actually been walking out into the middle of nowhere. We had no water with us and had no clue where we were. Luckily, we found our way back after a while, but neither of us could explain why we did that. I'd also take my voice recorder, and we caught quite a few strange things on it. One day before heading out there, we were talking about Skinwalker Ranch. It was only about a 40-ish minute drive from the property, so we thought, hey, why don't we go and try to find it? We thought it would be cool to say we had been there. After searching the internet, we found fairly good directions there, and headed out for the night. We had a bit of trouble locating it, but after a bit of driving around, we pulled into an area that was spot on from the descriptions we had read. We stepped out of the car, and the first thing we noticed was the mass amounts of bugs swarming us. Only a few short seconds later, we had huge dogs barking, growling, and running at us. We immediately jumped back in the car and took off. We ended up staying in the area for a little longer, exploring. Later that night, back at her property, we were sitting around the fire talking. All of a sudden, we start hearing barking. It was rather startling, and she immediately froze and said she'd never heard barking in the area before. She isn't one to get scared easily, so her uneasiness put me on edge. Not too long after that, there was more barking. Very slowly, we were being surrounded by what I assumed were coyotes. We both tried yelling, jumping around, and throwing rocks, but that didn't seem to do any good. I'd never known coyotes to act this way. We were terrified and had no clue what to do. Now I really want to stick around and find out if they get any closer to us. We doused the fire and flipped on our flashlights. She grabbed my hand, and we booked it back into the trailer. We were both shaking by the time we made it in, and she locked the door. I don't think either of us slept that well. I heard a lot of weird sounds and felt a sense of dread the entire night. As soon as the sun started to rise, we decided to pack up and get out of there. We neared the car, and what we saw sent chills down my spine. On the driver's side of the car window was a huge handprint made with mud. It was easily twice the size of our hands. We looked at each other and silently agreed that we needed to get the hell out of there. I'm not saying it was a skinwalker, but neither of us have been able to explain it. I've never been back. I need advice. Possible skinwalker? I don't use my Reddit account that often for making posts. But some things have happened to me in the past couple days that have really freaked me out, and I could use some advice regarding these events. Some background. I live in a rural county in central Texas. I live in a rural suburb about a mile and a half away from my grandparents, who live on an expansive longhorn cattle ranch. My grandparents are currently on a trip to Michigan, and they needed someone to watch their house, take care of their diabetic dog, and water the garden for a while. I love being alone and in the country, and I wouldn't be that far away from my mom and stepdad, so I agreed to do it for them. The first 2 days were fine. It was on the third day that this began. It was about 8:30 at night, and I just made myself dinner, a Lunchable, and was ready to sit down in the living room and watch TV for a couple hours until I went to bed. The recliner I was sitting in my grandparents' living room was directly beside their large glass doors, and I can see into their backyard and into the ranch from my seat. Just past the fence of the backyard were a dozen deer, which wasn't that odd, considering there's an insane amount of deer where I live. I watched them for a second when all of a sudden, I felt a wave of fear rush over me. It was like my brain stopped seeing the deer as something harmless, and instead they became a very imposing sight. I scanned over the deer and my eyes landed on one in particular. I noticed it because even though it was a doe, it was a good bit taller than the others. and seemed to be oddly bulky and slightly misshapen. I watched it for about a second before, out of nowhere, its head shot up from the grass and it stared directly at me. I hadn't been moving, and both dogs were inside with me and asleep, but I knew that it was focusing in on me. We stared for a second before it started to whip its head around in a really unnatural motion. The closest analogy I can make is when a video game glitches and the head of a character starts moving around wildly. It did this for another second before putting its head back down into the grass, like nothing had happened. At this point, I knew something was very, very wrong, and I knew that I had to get out of there. I called my mother, who was out fishing with my stepdad, and told her I was going home early because I was freaking out. I suffer from anxiety and can sometimes have panic attacks, so she understood, and I hauled ass out to my car. All I grabbed was my phone, my Lunchables, and an Eeyore blanket that I brought from my house. I don't really know why I grabbed the extra two things besides my phone, but I wasn't thinking clearly. I'm usually a very careful driver, especially on my grandparents' shoddy gravel driveway, but I knew I had to get off their property or else I'd be in real danger. My car is shitty, with the driver's side window permanently down. The entire time I drove up there, half a mile long driveway, I heard a sound coming from just a little bit behind my car. It sounded like if a mammal tried to replicate the sound of a cicada, very throaty and unnatural, and it was the same constant distance from my car the entire drive off the property. Right in front of the gate before going back out onto the road were a few of my grandparents' cows. I laid eyes on a black figure amongst them, and almost like an optical illusion, it changed to be the full front profile of a longhorn. I would have thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me in my panic if it wasn't for the horns. When I first saw the cow, it was a black figure with no horns, but within a second I spotted it. It suddenly had two giant horns on either side of its head. I managed to drive myself home, but I still felt extremely unsafe. My instincts were telling me that if I went inside, I'd be cornering myself. At this point, I was sitting in my driveway near hysterics, and on the phone with one of my friends, who I'll call Hope. Hope is extremely knowledgeable with this kind of stuff, and a true believer in the supernatural, and I knew she would be the only person who wouldn't think I was losing my mind completely. She talked to me and calmed me down, and I explained the deer to her, and she got pretty freaked out by it, and told me she knew what it was, probably. I told her that I didn't want to know, because I already had an idea as to what it might be, and her confirmation would only freak me out more. At this point, I made up my mind to go to the closest neighbor's house. I knew if I stayed alone, I would be putting myself in danger, so cue me crying and clutching an Eeyore blanket as I stroll up to my neighbor's backyard weeping and apologizing profusely. Thankfully, my neighbors are saints, and they took me inside and calmed me down. They stayed up with me for a good hour until my mother and stepdad got home from the lake, and I felt safe enough to go home. Because I had fully calmed down, I decided to go back to the ranch with my mom to clean up the mess I had left when I booked it out of there. But by the time we were even remotely close to the ranch, I felt the panic return. We got halfway down the driveway before I told my mother I couldn't do it, and that I had to go back. My mom was still planning to go back after she dropped me off at home, but I knew she would be in danger if she went alone, so I told her about the deer and told her I really didn't want her to go back that night, and she agreed. Hope has an older sister who is extremely well versed in the supernatural, and when she was informed of my experience, her advice for me was to never go back. This wasn't entirely realistic to me, since they are my grandparents, and I did leave most of my stuff there. But I tried to take her warning as seriously as possible, and decided to greatly limit my time there, and to not go back alone until my grandparents returned. The next day, today, at about noon, I had to go back to gather my stuff, and check on my grandma's diabetic dog, and let the bigger outside dog in so she would be safe from the heat. The feeling of the place was still tense and strange, but not terrifying. Later at about 8, I had to go back again, this time to feed the dog, let the other one out, and water the plants. I was way more hesitant about it, but my mom forced me to go. I was keeping my cool pretty well until, as we were going down the driveway, I saw a deer standing in the road. I immediately felt the fear of the previous night and started to freak out, telling my mother that I couldn't do it and that she had to turn around. As I was freaking out, my mom, distracted, trying to calm me back down, this fucking deer arched its back, like when a cat stretches. That tipped me over the edge into full-on hysterics. But my mom still refused to take me home. My mom went inside my grandparents' house, and I stayed in the truck and called Hope again. I told her what I saw, and she tried to calm me down, but nothing really worked. As I was freaking out on the phone to her, I saw a black shadow dart in and out of the rearview mirror. That was it. I called my mom and was screaming for her to come back outside and take me home. Even during normal panic attacks, it never reaches this point, and my mom was starting to get angry. She tried to convince me to come inside, but I was begging her and screaming so harshly that my vocal cords hurt. Eventually, she decided to take me home, and I was hyperventilating and sobbing until the moment I arrived back. At this point, I'm terrified, and I don't know what to do. I've never experienced anything like this before, and although I hope this is going to be an isolated set of occurrences, I can't be sure. For now, I'm going to try to stay away from my grandparents' ranch. But that really isn't realistic. I could use any advice in which you're willing to give. Native American Medicine Man. I've been enjoying this sub and decided to finally share my paranormal encounter to see if anyone else can bring me some clarity. It happened when I was 15. For context, I'm 22 years old now. Before this happened, I had no belief in anything paranormal and thought it was just not believable. However, the summer of 2011 proved me wrong. That summer, I was visiting my grandma's boyfriend's house, which is located in Florida. This was the first time I was visiting his house, since my grandma had recently moved in with him that year. I was excited because it was my first trip on my own without my parents, where I could spend a week hanging out by the beaches. When I arrived, my grandma's boyfriend, who is a great guy, greeted me and gave me a tour of his modest-looking house. The common theme I picked up on was Native American decor. He had family and descendants that were of the Sioux tribe in the Midwest, and he spent several summers as a teenager on reservations with the tribe. It was neatly decorated, and towards the end of the tour, he pointed to a small leather pouch that was hanging near his bed. He became very composed and stated how that item was a gift given to him by the Sioux tribe after spending several summers with them. He explained further on how it was a medicine pouch, which contained the crushed bones of a buffalo and a medicine man. He stated very clearly and without hesitation how this medicine man is a spirit who protects him and the place where the pouch is. And then he said, he might come visit you tonight, since you're a new guest. Of course, being the 15-year-old teenage boy, I felt no fear and laughed it off with him. I mean, there was no way a man could pop out of a bag and visit me, right? Well, by writing the story, you can probably guess that I was wrong. Shortly after giving the tour, my grandma's boyfriend had to leave. He was a contractor for an electrical company and had to drive up to northern Florida for a project the next day. So it was just my grandma in one room with a pouch and her two chihuahuas, with me on the other side of the house in the guest room. I remember falling asleep without any problems around 11 p.m. at night. However, I awoke to what I thought was a burglar, with loud noises coming from the kitchen and living room next door. I checked my phone, and it was a little past 3 a.m. The noises continued, and I began to panic. There's a security alarm in the house that was armed before bed, but I heard no alarm. My grandma, who could sleep through a nuclear explosion besides her, would not be doing crazy loud things at such an odd time. However, right as I was about to get out of bed, the door vibrated and shook. The noises from the kitchen stopped. I buried my head in the pillow and under the covers. The room got super cold, but yet I was sweating bullets. I kept pinching myself to see if it was a dream, but it wasn't. I peeked out of the corner of my eye from the pillow to see down the hallway, and I froze, locked in a gaze of the pale silhouette figure that resembled a Native American. He had a face that looked leathery and with wrinkles, his lips drawn into a thin straight line that was devoid of emotions. His eyes were pure white, and he looked straight through me. I could feel chills go down my spine. The hair stood up all over my body. My bed felt like it was shaking, too. It felt like an eternity before he turned away. Almost like he was walking frame by frame, like when you view things with a strobe light on. And then the door vibrated again. Finally, he left my room. He made some more noise outside, with banging cabinets and such again, and then it stopped. Naturally, I didn't sleep. Too scared to walk out of my room. That 15-year-old charisma and bravery was out the window. As soon as daylight hit the curtains of my room, I ran out to discover all the cabinets open, pots and pans thrown about, and then in the living room, with all the pictures and paintings thrown from the walls to the ground. I immediately woke up my grandma, who was shocked for a minute, but then nonchalantly stated, "Oh, that ghost again, making such a mess." I stood with my mouth wide open, trying to form sentences how to tell my grandmother that this is not normal. But I guess she was already used to it. The boyfriend came back later that evening, and I told him all about the encounter. He said he wasn't surprised, since, like he said earlier, I was new. Apparently, I am one of the many family members that had seen this medicine man. Apparently he's friendly. He just wanted to see if I was nice. At least they're somewhat considerate in the afterlife, but I mean, I have other opinions. Looking back now, I should have taken pictures. I only had a crappy flip phone at the time with a barely usable camera, and I just shut out most of the experience for years because I was terrified, honestly. I stayed for the rest of the week, still waking up at the same time, 3 a.m., but I didn't see the medicine man again. The house felt like there was heavy presence whenever you would walk in, sometimes during the day. The dogs would start low growling at the master bedroom where the pouch was, and nothing would be there. I was gracious for the hospitality, but I have never ventured to his house again. They moved to Alabama now. I hate to be a rude family member, but I don't think I'll be coming down for a housewarming gift. If you made it this far, thank you for reading. Just wanted to get this off my chest. About half the people I tell this to don't believe me. They enjoy it for a story, but not the actual experience of encountering something most people don't understand. I shut it out for a long time because it was just really frightening.